So the effective implementation of green infrastructure, making it work. So some different points of view on it. And everybody go? Everybody's here. Good. Our first speaker up is going to be James Kay, and he's a design engineer with Appleton and Martin. He was involved with the Grandview Heights NCP, Neighborhood Concept Plan, and that plan followed these findings and has implemented sort of some of the findings from these things. So it shows how what we've developed or what is being developed in these things is actually making its way, just like some other virus or whatever, all throughout the city. So I hope it's a good thing. And please welcome James Kay.
Thank you very much. I think Kim summed it up nicely in terms of, this is a bit of a history lesson this morning. I mean, we started off with East Clayton, and East Clayton started years and years ago. And I've been asked here today to talk to you about some of the work we did with the NCPs in Surrey over the last 2, 3, 4 years. So, I mean, we're still looking backwards a bit. And then this afternoon, we'll focus on where things are going. So, as I'm presenting these concepts and things, just keep in mind that this is where we came from, and this is the best that we could do at the time. So, keep that in mind. The three speakers this morning, we will be dealing with, I'm dealing with the engineering specifics. We have some drawings in here, we have some concepts. We'll talk a bit about the process of going through these NCPs, and then you'll get a chance to hear about the actual implementation from the developer's perspective, and then some of the newest NCPs that are going on. So that's kind of where we're going to go over the next 45 minutes or an hour. As David mentioned, I did have the opportunity to work on NCPs in Surrey, actually 3 of them. We did the North Grandview Heights NCP amendment in about 2004, 2005. We also did the engineering component of Grandview Heights #1 NCP around the same time frame. We also contributed to the Douglas NCP a year after that. So the idea here is that these became the kind of the standard. It became things that got implemented widespread across South Surrey, for good or for bad. But this is where we came from. So the map that's in front of you here is the catchment map, and I apologize because north is actually on the right of the screen, so it looks a little skewed. But generally speaking, we're talking about South Surrey. We're talking about 24th Avenue north. We're talking about all the way Grandview Heights #1 NCP ended at 28th. North Grandview Heights was from 28th to 32nd. There was a big block of land in there. Kind of went from 156th Street to 164th, 168th. So it's that whole neighborhood in there. And as you can see, starting at 24th really is a bit of the watershed divide. I mean, we're really at the top end of the system. The drainage flows north. It flows north as the headwaters of Wheels Brook. It starts in roadside channels and starts getting more channelized as it goes through private property, up north of 32nd to Morgan Creek Golf Course, ultimately to Old Logging Ditch and to the Nickelmeco River. So, I mean, this is when we started this is a pretty pristine water course, watershed. And when we started talking about development, it was a question of what are the priorities? What are we going to protect? What impacts are we going to have, and how are we going to mitigate them? So those are really the challenges that were put to us. Keep in mind that these NCPs were client-driven, and it is a big, big difference. When we're looking at NCPs now and some of the ones in the past that are city-driven, it's a little easier to protect certain priorities, regardless of the cost. Keep in mind that these 3 NCPs were developer-driven, and I may come under fire for this, but cost is a consideration. Not the only consideration, but it was one of the things that we considered as we were considering how to best implement these NCPs. So, anyways, the point is you can see the watershed, you can see what we were up against, and then the challenge was how best to fit 2,500 more units into North Grandview. I think it's another 3,000 or 4,000 into Grandview Heights #1. And we're talking significant redevelopment and significant density, view density into these neighborhoods. So that was the challenge. Because it was owner-based and the city wasn't directly driving, they challenged us with performance criteria. And as an engineer, you usually hate to hear that. You got the development bylaw, you know what you're supposed to put in. We do pipes, we do ponds, usually it's straightforward. But the performance criteria we were challenged with really changed the way we had to look at things. And it was a matter of don't just cookie cutter what's been done before. Figure out what the watershed actually needs. How best to actually meet the needs of this watershed. It goes from the uplands, which has really high groundwater, to the point where there's artesian wells coming out of the ground, to the lowlands, where the floodplains and the farmers' lands are flooding on a fairly regular basis, and how to meet the ARTSA criteria, which is how much flooding can take place before the crops are harmed. So I mean, the complexities of this are really quite significant. So we charged off for the NCP, keeping in mind for 2004, 2005, this is before integrated watershed management planning was really as common as it is today. Now it kind of rolls off the tongue. People know what IWMPs are, and they're more common. At the time, this was just a component of our NCP. So the city challenged us with these performance criteria and said, okay, what does the watershed need? We went back, we did continuous simulation, which again, now is a very common, you throw it around, you build a computer model, you put in every water course, every ditch, every pipe, every piece of land, and figure out how the catchment responds to rain and rain events, and how it responds to development. At the time, this was we didn't have a water balance model, unfortunately. It was a lot more complicated to try and figure out what the impacts of some of our best management practices were going to be, what the impacts of some of the development was going to be. But at the end of the day, we came out with this model, and we honestly sat down and figured that if we put in these best management practices, the sustainability initiatives, all these buzzwords, but if we put in the appropriate topsoil measures, the appropriate infiltration measures, we honestly figured that we could save on the engineering infrastructure, on the ponds, on the pipes, and cost justify a lot of these things that we're talking about. That was the aim. Completed this simulation, completed this model, and much to our dismay, came out and said, no, in fact, the ponds were still required for flood control. The pipes were still required for conveyance control. So we weren't able to make significant advances in that area. However, when we started negotiating with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the impacts of what this development might have on the hillside, other performance criteria came out. Peak flow control, okay, ponds, we were there, we already had that in mind. Volume reduction. Wait a second, our ponds don't do that. Our current measures don't do that. Water quality control. Okay, now we've got some real challenges here. Add to that the hydrology of the area where the water's coming up out of the ground, not so well going back into it. And these performance criteria that had us scared in the beginning had us really quite frightened at this point. So, not only us, but our clients as well. I mean, these become major challenges to develop. All right, so as for context, this is the North Grandview Heights NCP, a range of densities from 2 to 4 units per acre, all the way up to 15 to 25 units per acre. The creativity in this NCP was the concept of clustering. And the idea with clustering, as I think it was kind of was alluding to, ultimate density is a tower with a lot of green space. Well, instead of the ideas that we had in Clayton, if we really tried to pull development together a little bit, to cluster 4 or 5 homes in a smaller area, leave the trees and the green space around, in theory that leaves some much more open space, much more infiltration opportunity. So that was one of the big ideas in the North Grandview Heights NCP. The Grandview Heights #1 NCP, much higher density. I mean, we're talking apartment style now. We're talking some single family, some dense townhouses, and the impacts that they have on the hydrology and the hydraulics of this catchment. Again, 24th Avenue is the divide. This is the headwaters to the entire watershed, and how it is we wanted to deal with that. So, and this is where, again, this is one of the site plans for Grandview Heights #1. We're going to talk about some of the engineering specifics. I apologize, the next few drawings are a little hard to read, but it's really the concepts that are important. So let's focus on those. As you can see with this component of the Morgan Heights neighborhood, you can see the detention pond in the northwest corner there. Pond was part of it. Long linear parks, though, long linear opportunities to get water on the surface to allow it to get into those top few layers. Because as I said, you've got high groundwater. You take a trench 3 or 4 meters down and expect to infiltrate at that level, you're really in trouble. So it was kind of a change the land use planning based on what we knew about the hydraulics and the hydrology.